Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Washington Post. I'm Fred Ryan, publisher, and we're delighted to have you here this morning for this important conversation at Washington Post Live. This year, an estimated 1.7 million Americans will receive a new diagnosis of cancer. Finding a cure for cancer is a national priority, but for many of these patients and their loved ones, it's an urgent matter of life or death. The good news is that the United States is making great progress in the fight against cancer. Thanks to cutting-edge research and innovative medical treatments, more and more lives are being saved. But obstacles still remain for doctors and scientists seeking a cure. And patients continue to struggle not only with the physical and emotional devastation of their cancer, but also the enormous financial burden of their health care. Today's conversations will highlight the urgency of addressing these challenges and present ways that government and the private sector can help. First, we'll hear from the Acting Commissioner of the FDA, Dr. Ned Sharpless, who will discuss the agency's plans for bringing life-saving drugs to market. We'll also hear from Senator Jack Reed, who is a leader in the effort on Capitol Hill to fund increased research into pediatric cancer. During our panel on ovarian cancer, we'll learn more about the movement aiming to change the way women receive treatment and support for this devastating illness. And we'll wrap up with moving firsthand accounts of what it means to live with a cancer diagnosis and the ways that patients and their families summon strength and hope. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, Tessero, and our supporting sponsor, the GW Cancer Center. Now, please join me in welcoming Acting FDA Commissioner Ned Sharpless and the Washington Post's Lori McGinley to the stage. Thanks. Thanks again.
Oops. Good morning, I'm Lori McGinley. I'm a health and science reporter here at the Washington Post. I'm delighted to be joined this morning by Acting FDA Commissioner Dr. Ned Sharpless. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Dr. Sharpless has been on the job a little bit over 2 months at the FDA, and he was previously the director of the National Cancer Institute. So Dr. Sharpless, let me start by asking, you've been there a whole 2 months now, so how do you hope to make your mark on the FDA?
Yeah, I think maybe it's relevant to talk about my background that brought me to the job a little bit. I started my career as a physician, as a cancer doctor, and at some point transitioned most from taking care of patients to being more in the lab, running an academic research lab, studying the molecular genetics of cancer. Because I felt like, we were, at that time, the progress in cancer was very slow and it was frustrating. We were doing the same thing over and over in patients and we really weren't helping them, particularly people with metastatic solid tumors, to the degree that I would have liked. And so I became a researcher, and then at some point during that, I also got into the wonderful world of administration by becoming a cancer center director at the University of North Carolina. And from there, the White House called me about leading the NCI in 2017. And the National Cancer Institute is a great place. That was a terrific job and a wonderful place to work with these great scientists and this wonderful sense of passion and mission. And then, as you mentioned recently, 2 months ago, over to the FDA. So that background, I think, informs my thinking about what the FDA can do. I'm pretty familiar with the way drug discovery and development works, and so I think that that's an area where we really want to help patients. We have to do that in a streamlined and efficient way. I think. At NCI, I was passionate about how we use data. I felt like there's a lot of data that could be better aggregated and binned and used in a more effective way, and I think that conversation directly translates to the FDA. I think, something I'd really focused on at the NCI was developing the workforce, making sure we had the right talent to address the future needs for cancer research, and that problem directly translates to the FDA, where staffing the right people for these to regulate these very innovative new products that we have is a real challenge to the FDA. So there's some stuff that I did at the NCI that is sort of similar to what I would like to do at the FDA, but then there's some things that are FDA specific that are really different. The FDA has a role across diseases beyond cancer. It has food and cosmetics and animal products. It has tobacco control. So a number of areas where some of those those approaches, developing the workforce, using data, modernizing clinical trials, things that I know a lot from the cancer world, I think are applicable, but they're also areas where some of the problems are quite different.
Would you expect your agenda to be different from Dr. Gottlieb's, or would it be pretty much the same?
Yeah, I think I'm a big fan of Dr. Gottlieb's. We agreed on a number of things, and I think he was, in many ways, identified places for the agency to go that I strongly agree with and plan to continue. But facts on the ground change, and there are areas where things have to be done. We have to change our thinking and change, do mild course corrections. So there'll be some of that.
Are you satisfied with clinical trials at this point? You've been an advocate of making them quicker, cheaper, more accessible to people. What more can the FDA do on that?
Yeah, something I learned from my own work in drug discovery is that I don't know is generally appreciated is the spiraling cost of clinical trials. The per patient costs to accrue a patient to a cancer clinical trial, for example. And that's a real challenge for drug discovery because that makes it more expensive and slower, and therefore drugs or new therapies don't become available to patients in a way that we would like. And so I think at the NCI I was very committed to try and use novel approaches, which may include the days of 2 large randomized trials showing an overall survival advantage, I think, are no longer appropriate in cancer for most patients. We still do some of those. There's a need for that kind of trial in particular situations, but I think we should be very comfortable using other endpoints and other trial designs, and even data from the real world, from what happens to patients when they get out and get cared for in the real world. And I think the FDA has been very aggressive about adopting that, particularly in cancer, but in other disease types as well. And I think it's going to have to happen because as the approaches become more and more precision-based, the groups of patients become smaller and smaller. Doing large randomized trials becomes more and more difficult, and therefore, I think novel clinical trials design is really going to be important for both the research effort, like at the NIH, and then also the regulatory effort at the FDA.
As a cancer researcher, what are you most excited about? There are advances on the horizon. I've heard you say that you thought maybe we were getting a little blasé about them because there have been so many the last several years.
This is a speech I've given a couple of times. For example, we just had ASCO, American Society of Clinical Oncology, this big 25,000 people go to Chicago and talk about cancer for a week. And this, if you read the coverage of it this year, there's a sense that it was a down ASCO, that there was no big wow
It's a quiet
moment. And I've been in the field long enough. I remember when going to ASCO, there was one year the big story was that we had 4 different regimens for lung cancer, none of which really worked. They were all equally ineffective, but one was less toxic than the other 3. So we found a less deadly way to not treat your cancer very effectively. And now, you go to ASCO, and this down ASCO had a positive survival trial in breast cancer, great looking data in lung cancer, a new CAR T product that looked exciting, a KRAS drug or a therapy for KRAS, a target we've been working on for 30 years. So, it's really exciting, actually. And if you look at from the FDA perspective of where the therapeutic areas where there's a lot going on, cancer and perhaps, gene therapy or regenerative medicine are the 2 bright spots, in my opinion. I'm concerned that we don't see that kind of progress in other areas of the FDA. So, neurodegenerative disorders and, antibiotic development. There are areas where we have real therapeutic need where the progress does not seem as bright to me. So I'm asking myself, why does cancer seem to work better in terms of novel therapeutic discovery than other areas? And is there something we can do from a regulatory perspective to make that, disseminate that across other therapeutic classes?
What's the answer to that?
Well, I think part of the success in cancer has been a good biologic understanding of the problem. So when I was on the council of the National Institute of Aging, the NIA has a large portfolio of Alzheimer's research, and I was always, arguing that a lot of the funding should really be spent on the basic science of Alzheimer's. I didn't feel like we had a sufficient understanding of that disease to do these large therapeutic trials, and I think history's proven that our therapeutic understanding or basic science understanding there needs to be improved. So I think part of it is a sort of NIH basic science. We got to fund the right questions and develop a better understanding. But I don't think that's solely the issue. I think the use of surrogate endpoints to approve drugs in cancer has been a good thing in many ways. It's allowed us to get drugs approved. The cycle times for cancer drugs used to be sort of the longest, very, very long. And it was daunting to a pharmaceutical company to take that on. And by compressing the cycle times using accelerated approval and breakthrough designation and other kinds of FDA approaches, that's been really beneficial for cancer. Even though that approach was invented pretty much for HIV, it's been very useful in cancer. And I'm wondering, do we have those kinds of endpoints that you could use for approval in other therapeutic classes so that they could shorten their cycle times and get a path to approval that would be incentivize companies to work on them?
Now, we know that you're not responsible for drug pricing, but I'm just wondering, what do you think about the high drug prices of the cancer drugs, of the new cancer drugs and gene therapies? Are you concerned about how society will handle it and whether people with lousy insurance won't be able to get access to the drugs?
Yeah, I'm concerned in a number of ways. I mean, as someone who used to take care of a lot of patients, I know people who've sort of had to make the choice between their antifungal medicine after their bone marrow transplant or their rent. Nobody should be forced to make these kinds of choices. And the high cost of drugs from a patient care point of view is very concerning. I also worry about the burden, it's not the FDA problem, but from a payer perspective, the CMS side, the burden of these very expensive therapies on American healthcare costs. So it's very concerning. I think it's also important to say that drugs are expensive for multiple different reasons, and they're not, and how we should feel about those groups is probably a little different. So, some drugs are very expensive, or new therapies are very expensive because they're really innovative, highly novel, new inventions, first in man kind of stuff, and that bothers me when those therapies are extremely overpriced. But it doesn't bother me as much because my sense is there. Somebody's invented something really great, and that's good for humanity. And having a drug that works that's expensive is a better problem than having no drug at all, what we see in many therapeutic classes. But the other reason another reason drugs can be high is because of the sort of what Scott Gottlieb called the shenanigans, these pay for delay and patent gaming and or these sort of regulatory sort of virtual monopolies that can get created. And those are areas where the FDA, frankly, has more to do. So we can try and create a regulatory pathway that prevents those things from happening. And this is, wonky but very important things like how the Orange Book and the Purple Book work, or our policy on 180-day exclusivity period, and these sorts of things that allow generic drugs to come to market. So in that area, I think the FDA can support these, market-based pro-competition approaches that can lead to new approvals. I think there's been a lot of success. The data in generic drugs, that's an area where the FDA has seen record approvals over the last few years, and with support from Congress, that side of the house is in better shape. Biosimilars is an area that's really developing, and it's still early days. But we're about to approve. We're over 20 now biosimilars approved, and that number is going to grow. And we just announced guidelines whereby biosimilars could become substitutable, interchangeability guidelines, which would make them even better from a perspective of driving costs down. So I think the FDA can really do some things there to make biologics and small molecule drugs available in a sort of generic or biosimilar approach.
Dr. Gottlieb was a big critic of youth vaping, as we all know. And I'm just wondering, the FDA has taken some steps on that, but if underage vaping continues to go up, as it very well might, and the data shows in the next survey, which I think probably will be available this summer, that the rates are still going up. What can the FDA do, and what are you prepared to do on that?
Yeah, I think it's important to say, I don't really need to wait to see another set of bad numbers this summer to know that this is a problem. I mean, I think the FDA is already all in on the topic of youth tobacco use and youth and vaping. This has been an epidemic, an explosion of youth use, and is of great concern. I think perhaps in retrospect, the enforcement discretion period the FDA initially tried, a 5-year period, was too long. I think we all agree that is the case now. In fairness to the FDA, when they made that decision, e-cigarettes weren't the product they are today. They sort of looked like more of a niche thing that weren't going to be that appealing to youth. And now, of course, that's no longer true. There's been this explosion of youth use, and thinking has changed. And so, the FDA is already and will continue to do a number of important things. So we have enforcement. We've inspected probably 1 million+ retailers. We've sent out thousands of warning letters. We've had, we have this practice where we send underage people in to buy tobacco products and identify the frequency of violative stores, and in some chains that can be up to 30-40% of stores will sell to a youth inappropriately. We have a huge education campaign. We are trying to get into the high schools and middle schools with an anti-vaping message. We've cracked down on these social media influencers, these people that are online that are basically hawking nicotine or nicotine-containing products in a way that clearly violates FDA advertising rules. And they're not disclosing the products have nicotine, and they're sort of hyping these e-liquids. And they're, appealing-looking young adults with tattoos and muscles and, millions of Instagram followers and the kind of thing that would be appealing to, a 15-year-old kid. So we're trying to, enforcement and education. And then lastly, we gotta get the policy right. And as I mentioned, that enforcement discretion period I think is too long. And we are now accelerating that. And
do you anticipate further acceleration of that?
Yeah, I do. As you're probably aware, there's been a court decision. So the American Academy of Pediatric sued, and others sued the FDA over the enforcement discretion period. And we're working with the judge and the plaintiffs to try and come up with a remedy that is a lot faster than what it was, because as I said, nobody in the FDA anymore really thinks that the 2022 date was a good idea. But yet, still something the FDA can actually do. There's perhaps, we don't know how many of these applications we're going to get. It could be a very large number, and each of those requires a review process that's fair and valid, and so we have to make sure that we have the staff and capabilities to do that. But that's not an excuse. That's just a fact. We have to make sure that we can do this in a way that that really protects American public health.
On regular cigarettes, what's the single biggest thing that the FDA could do about that to reduce smoking?
Yeah, I don't think there's a single thing. I mean, if there were, we'd have done it, right? As an oncologist, I just really find combustible cigarettes, traditional cigarettes, to be about one of the most dangerous products in American life. 600,000 deaths a year in the United States related to tobacco. 30% of cancer deaths are probably still tobacco associated. And by the way, those numbers are improving, right? So that, combustible cigarette use has been declining. And so it's down to 600,000 deaths a year. So that's really, I think, striking about how the problem is pernicious and hard to deal with. And there's still probably, 40, 50 million smokers in the United States of combustible cigarettes. So I think, the things that we've been doing in terms of education and other policies to try and discourage use have been effective. The question remains, would other forms of nicotine replacement therapy, beyond just gum and lozenges, but like delivered by an electronic nicotine delivery system, would those really help smokers quit? And there are some data from the UK that is true. So I think the United States is obligated to think about the use of those kinds of devices for tobacco cessation in adult smokers. But it's a really tough public health needle, because we don't, on the one hand, we don't really want to encourage people to use, to become nicotine addicts who aren't, particularly kids. But on the other hand, if there is an off-ramp, if you will, a way to quit smoking that's better, then we want to make sure those products are available to smokers.
What about the effort to reduce nicotine in cigarettes? And Dr. Gottlieb also talked about banning menthol in cigarettes. Where do those stand? Yeah,
we have a couple of proposed rules that related to flavored cigars, nicotine levels, and menthol ban. All of those went out for sort of the comment to the advance notice of proposed rulemaking, and in aggregate probably over 100,000 comments. Thousands of comments per rule. And we're working through those, looking at the science, and it's one thing to say you want to set a level of nicotine, but then the details of that would matter. Is how much should that be? And the last thing you want to do is set a number that wasn't right and encourage people. If you reduce nicotine levels modestly, for instance, you might just make people smoke more, right? And so that you have to think about a threshold that really would get people to quit, as opposed to merely encourage increased use. And so there are scientific questions related to these policies. There are technical challenges, but I'm confident we are going to figure these things out and continue on those policies.
We're out of time, but I have to ask you one more question, which is, do you expect to be nominated to be the permanent commissioner of the FDA?
I think I'd like to be nominated to be the permanent commissioner of the FDA. I learned all the acronyms, right? So I moved over and have figured out that branch of federal government. The FDA is a wonderful, marvelous place. The people are these cutting-edge scientists with this great passion and sense of regulatory mission. So I think it'd be a great place to be involved with, but that decision of who runs the FDA is really up to the White House. I've always said I'm a federal servant and I will do what they need me to do. And if that's be acting for a while, I'll do that. And if that's be a confirmed commissioner, I'll do that. I do think, I will say, the FDA needs a strong voice in charge of it. It has a number of, there are a number of sort of problems the FDA has to face with the media, with government, with other, with hiring and retention. And so a confirmed commissioner in many ways would be good for the FDA. I think a long period of acting would not be good for the agency.
Well, we really are out of time now. Thank you so much, Dr. Sharpless. We really appreciate your being with us today. And my colleague, Paige Cunningham, will be here with her guest for the next segment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good morning. I'm Paige Winfield Cunningham, a health policy reporter and author of the Health 202 newsletter here at the Post. And I'm excited to introduce my guest this morning, Senator Jack Reed, Democrat from Rhode Island. And he's been a huge advocate for pediatric cancer research. He most recently co-wrote the Childhood Cancer Survivorship, Treatment, Access, and Research Act, which was signed into law by President Trump last year. Unfortunately, Senator Capito couldn't join us. Her flight back to D.C. was canceled, but we're happy to have Senator Reed here this morning.
Thank you.
I'm excited to get into our conversation, but first I want to ask you a little bit of a different question because we've got some breaking news about Patrick Shanahan, Trump's defense nominee's confirmation, and his hearing has been delayed again, and Yahoo's reporting today that's due to allegations in his private life. What can you tell us?
Well, we're still waiting for a nomination from the president. That's his sole prerogative. We haven't received it yet, so we can't begin the formal deliberations. And then when we get the nomination, we'll have to start doing our due diligence, have members of the Armed Services Committee talk to the nominee, and then schedule a hearing. Right now, we are beginning our deliberations on the National Defense Authorization Act, and that should take up 2 weeks. So the schedule is already full. So anything that would happen would probably be weeks from now, even if the nomination came up within the next few days.
What are some of the questions you have about these allegations?
Well, first of all, we have to look at the reports. You can't just begin to speculate. You have to look at what the evidence has been presented. The FBI is doing an investigation. They always do an investigation, these high-level appointments. And then you look at that, and then the questions evolve directly from that reporting.
The administration announced 1,000 troops are going to support efforts in the Middle East yesterday, but Shanahan was nowhere to be found. Who's in charge of this deployment?
Well, he's the acting Secretary of Defense, and he has full authority as the acting Secretary of Defense to conduct at the direction of the President, these operations. The technical sort of responsibility would go to the Central Command, General McKenzie, who is the Central Commander. He, I presume, has requested these troops as a defensive measure, a deterrence measure. From what I'm hearing, they are designed to protect our forces and provide defensive capabilities in the region, but it would be under General McKenzie that these troops would operate.
Do you think the president should withdraw his nomination?
He hasn't made a nomination yet, so that's not only a hypothetical question. We're waiting for a nomination.
But I mean, I guess, do you think he should reconsider it?
Again, he has not presented a nomination yet, so it's difficult to reconsider a nomination that you have not made. His issue is, will he nominate Mr. Shanahan? And if he does nominate Mr. Shanahan, then the Senate will do our job.
But do you think, given all of this, Shanahan is the best candidate for the job?
I think that has to be an evaluation that's done on the record. What he's done as the acting secretary, what he did previously as the undersecretary, and any other factors that are pertinent to the role of Secretary of Defense. I think everyone deserves consideration if you're nominated. The question right now is, will the president nominate him?
Well, let's get into our conversation about pediatric cancer research. Sure. As you know, the president has called on Congress to allocate $500 million toward pediatric cancer over the next 10 years, but his budget proposal also would have slashed overall funding for NIH and the National Cancer Institute. Is the president sending an inconsistent message here?
Well, I think absolutely inconsistent, because the operations of the National Cancer Institute and NIH in general is not as discrete as one might think. There's a collaboration between scientists. There's basic research that can open up venues that help pediatric cancer. Just focusing on pediatric cancer and then cutting most everything else, I think will be so disruptive that it'll not advance pediatric cancer, but maybe inhibit it, the research.
What do you think about the funding level that the president asked for pediatric cancer? I know that Speaker Pelosi had criticized that ask, saying it wasn't nearly large enough. That's a frequent criticism that you'll hear from Democrats when Republicans propose funding for things. But how much money do you think Congress should be devoting to this?
Well, we have in our legislation asked for $30 million a year, and put that down. I think we should increase that, and I think we should do it in the context of not cutting other places in NIH, but a increase in funding on NIH and the National Cancer Institutes in particular, because this is something that we need to do to find the cures, to find better diagnostic techniques, better treatment techniques, and this is an effort that should be not just restricted to one part of NIH, but the whole enterprise.
I believe that if you look at overall NIH funding, only about 4%, or sorry, funding for the National Cancer Institute, only about 4% goes to pediatric cancers. Why do you think that is? I mean, it's of course, a small percentage of total cancers diagnosed. However, it is the second leading cause of death for kids after accidents. So why haven't we seen more funding for this?
I think part of it was before we started getting very active, and that began in 2008 with the passage of the Carolyn Price Walker legislation, which I was the lead sponsor in the Senate. That was the first time we really said, we're going to commit money specifically to pediatric cancer, $30 million. Then we're going to start getting the states to create registries so they can track cancers. Then we're going to do much more in terms of education and outreach. And then we built on that for the STAR Act, which was signed in 2018. So we've been trying to increase the focus. I think one of the problems that you allude to in your question is that the good news is that the number of cases of childhood cancer in the country is about 11 to 12,000 a year. That's not excusable, particularly with a family that has a child with cancer, but it's not the same level of other types of cancers, and they tend to get more attention, more resources because of the sheer number. That's why we felt we had to, in 2008, to really focus on pediatric cancer, to get that as a focal point because it was being overlooked.
Yeah, and I know a lot of your bill has to do with improving opportunities for scientists to research pediatric cancer. What were the shortcomings there? I know your legislation tries to address biobanks and state registries. How does that work?
Well, this is an evolution of the two pieces of legislation, but when we created the registries in the 2008 legislation. So what we want to do is basically, get the statistics of the incidence of cancer, the types of cancers, get it nationwide so that the scientists can start looking at trends, give them clues as to how to focus their research. And then in the later legislation, the STAR Act, we also started looking at the effects after a child has recovered from cancer, because we had indications that they had other medical complications as they got older. And we wanted those complications to be charted, collected, so that they would know and medical professionals would know that if a child had gone through a certain cancer therapy, they might be more susceptible to this type of later non-cancer medical incident. So we started doing that. Then the other thing we started trying to do is to get the NIH to start collecting biosamples and doing it in a consistent way throughout the country so that the researchers wouldn't have just a small group studying at one particular hospital, but could call on a much broader range of data and therefore make their research much more effective, and we hope lead to cures. A lot of this, I must confess, began, as many of these initiatives did, by first the appreciation, and I think this is a common appreciation, of childhood disease, cancer or otherwise, has an effect not just on the individual child, but the whole family. Most families, if there's a serious disease, cancer or otherwise, it's not just that child it's the siblings, it's the mother, it's the father, everyone's affected. So that's one of the reasons I thought this was very important. But then I had the opportunity in 2004, a couple came in, Vince and Nancy Haight. They had just lost their son, Ben, to cancer, and they had one other son, Nick, just a wonderful family. And Vince was a Master Chief in the Navy in the submarine service. And the sacrifices that they were making, not only for the country, but also to care for a child while he was deployed, all of that sort of hit home hard with me and said, we have to do much, much more when it comes to pediatric cancer. And that started the process of the first legislation in 2008 and subsequent legislation. And I've been very lucky to have great support across the aisle. Deborah Price, my former colleague from Ohio, and now Shelley Moore Capito, as they say in West Virginia, Capito, is a wonderful, wonderful advocate.
Yeah, how did you end up partnering with her on this legislation?
She, like myself, were very much interested in trying to do something to move along. We had done, I think, good work with the original legislation in 2008, but there was more to do. And she, kind of a natural bonding, and she was a great, great colleague. We worked together closely, and because it was a bipartisan effort, it was successful.
So you said this, I guess this bill was first passed in 2008, and then it's been reauthorized?
No, well, the 2008 bill was the Carolyn Price Walker bill, appropriately named after Deborah Price's daughter who succumbed to cancer. That started the process of identifying pediatric cancer as a specific item, specific funding, getting the registries in place, et cetera. Then we wanted to build on that on the STAR Act. So the STAR Act wasn't just a simple reauthorization, it was an expansion. One of the other things we did in the STAR Act is, for the first time, we put a pediatric oncologist on the board of the National Cancer Advisory Group, so that those policymakers in NIH who decide funding levels and approaches to different cancers, they didn't have a pediatric oncologist. Now they do. So pediatric oncology has a voice at the table. And that was another improvement we put in place in terms of the latest legislation. So this has not been just simply reauthorizing, it's been building on the 2008 Act with the 2018 Act. And we're still in the process of trying better ways to help pediatric cancer patients.
Have you been able to see any results from your legislation?
We have St. Baldrick's Society, which is very active. Again, I must commend the advocates. They were on the ones pounding on every senator's door and every representative's door and making the case quite compellingly. There's nothing more persuasive than having someone from your own state or district come in and talk about their problems with their children. They've reported increased funding for research, many more research activities going on today. The registries seem to be much more aggressive and expanding state by state, and the collection of biosamples are getting much, much more frequent, so that the database for research has increased. And the very fact that NIH is now putting more money out to universities and hospitals for research in pediatric cancer is an excellent sign. We've got to do more. And then the follow-up, they've been very complimentary about the follow-up, because what we found, and we've actually asked GAO to do some investigation, is that sometimes you'll have a young adult who came through a process of pediatric cancer, but now has the need for an unrelated medical problem. And insurance companies are a little reluctant about paying sometimes. So we want to make sure that we can show that there is this connection, that this is something that not only has to be helped, but has to be supported by the insurance companies as well as the medical establishment.
Well, and this is there's a lot of encouraging news in this area too, of course. I mean, as you know, survival rates have improved dramatically. I think was the survival for childhood cancer was about 10% in the 70s to now nearly 90% today. Do you have hopes we can kind of close that gap, and kind of how are things changing? I mean, you mentioned that your legislation also tries to address survivors of pediatric cancer who then tend to have other health problems crop up later in life, sometimes because of the treatment that they had to undergo.
No, I think that's the whole goal. The whole goal is to get to the point where we can cure these cancers. That's not easily achievable. These are very, very difficult. There are some cancers in children that have had remarkable success rates because of the research and because of the diagnostic techniques and the treatments. There are other cancers that are very fatal and continue to be fatal and very, very abrupt too, within a year or less in terms of from diagnosis to death. That's difficult. We want a full-out approach. I mean, it'd be nice to think about this as something that we can essentially eliminate. We have to try.
Of course, drug pricing is a top-line conversation in Washington right now. The administration's been trying to pull some levers on that, and there's some efforts in the House and Senate. And there's been a lot of news recently, too, about shortages in the drugs that are used to treat pediatric cancer. What kind of approach to both shortages and pricing would you like to see Congress undergo?
I think the pricing approach is a couple of things. One is that Medicare and Medicaid should be able to negotiate with the drug companies the same way the Veterans Administration does for the best prices. They have huge patients numbers. They would have market power. This would be a market approach to it by negotiating with the suppliers. That, I think, is a sensible approach. Second, I think we should prevent the ability of some of the drug companies to extend their patent protections by making slight changes. There are even some incidents of companies paying generic companies not to bring their drug to market so that they can keep their very expensive drug.
Pay for delay. Yes.
Pay for delay. I think that's wrong. I think that should be outlawed. So in terms of those price issues, those are three aspects that we should aggressively try right now. I think they'll work. And again, they're generally market-based solutions. Negotiation by Medicare and Medicaid, that's a market approach. Let's just talk, and we have these many customers, give us your best price. With respect to sometimes the shortage or the lack of specific drugs for pediatric cancers, we have tried in the past to give incentives to do that, and the incentives have been taken. I think we might even think now about trying to encourage them to these companies to be much more aggressive in getting these new treatments out, even if it's not for them a big market. That's one of the problems. I mean, the good news again, small number of patients. For the companies, the research, the marketing, all of that's very expensive. But I think incentives for more drugs for pediatric cancer, and then maybe getting a little bit tougher in terms of saying, you know, we expect you to play your role in this part too, and we're gonna, you know, if things you need or want, you might not get them without helping us with our pediatric cancer drugs.
Are you optimistic Congress is going to be able to undergo some kind of bipartisan action on drug pricing this year?
Well, the drug pricing is more difficult. As I said, the pediatric cancer has struck one of those bipartisan tones. Everything we've done has been bipartisan. And I think if there is anything that could bring us together, it would be children's disease. That's, I think, cuts across all lines. And again, it goes back to the fundamental sort of human recognition that a child is ill, you have to help the child, but also affects the family. So I think that is very persuasive. The issue, though, when you get into pricing and other aspects of that, you know, for example, the negotiations with the companies by CMS on behalf of Medicare and Medicaid, that seems to be running into roadblocks. The House has been very active, but the Senate does not seem to want to take that up. And that's unfortunate. I think that's something that could help the American people tremendously.
That does seem like a non-starter at this point with Republicans in the Senate.
I think with their record to date of significant legislation passed by the House and no real consideration. Frankly, we've been doing nominations now for the last several months. We hope we can get on to the National Defense Authorization Act, which is another rare bipartisan effort. But there's a lot of legislation that's just piling up that we should be voting on in the Senate, and we're not.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank
you.
Senator Reed for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And please stay seated for the next portion of our program.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Nora McMahon, and I am so happy to be here on behalf of Tesaro. I have a personal stake in the ovarian cancer community because when I was in my 30s, I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And while I was going through aggressive chemotherapy, I was searching online for any other women my age who were facing the disease. And unfortunately, I didn't find that many women who were sharing their stories. And with that knowledge, I went ahead and launched an online storytelling and mentor platform for young adults with cancer named Cancer Grad. Now, the highlight of today's discussion is to spark a dialogue to encourage the public to learn more about ovarian cancer, specifically the recurrence and the importance of sharing the various perspectives. It's valuable to hear from those who live through it, those who work to treat it, and especially for women managing a devastating cancer like ovarian cancer, in particular in regards to treatment options for them. Now, gynecologic cancers are often overlooked, and especially for those of us who have been diagnosed with ovarian cancer. This is due to many things, including a lack of resources and low diagnosis rates, compared especially to other female-specific cancers. Change is needed. I can say that personally from looking on the outside, but many women are diagnosed with ovarian cancer when it's already in its advanced stages. Now, there are a lot of advancements that are going on currently in cancer care, but the awareness about maintenance therapies is lacking, and so we're looking to take on that challenge. Now, what is Not on My Watch? Not on My Watch is a nationwide movement created by Tesaro to empower women within the ovarian cancer community, specifically those who are in recurrence, and to be educated and understand that they have options and to be proactive about facing the recurrence. And until recently, women with recurrent ovarian cancer had limited options. After retreatment with chemotherapy, women entered a watch and wait observation period until their cancer recurred. Fortunately, there have been recent advancements in treatment that provide these women with options. And the focus is to expose the emotional toll of watch and wait, and to increase awareness and to the need for proactive care in maintenance, in managing the disease. Now, on today's panel, we have Scott Foley. Scott is an actor and a Not on My Watch ambassador. He has partnered with Tesaro on the Not on My Watch movement to share his personal story of being a secondary caregiver to his late mother during her time with recurrent ovarian cancer. We also have Dr. Rebecca Arend. She is the assistant professor and associate scientist at the UAB O'Neill Comprehensive Cancer Center Experimental Therapeutics Program. And we also have Robin Cohen, and Robin is the CEO and co-founder of the Sandy Rollman Ovarian Cancer Foundation. She's an oncology nurse who started Sandy Rollman as a way to honor a former patient and friend that passed away from ovarian cancer. Now, right now, I'd like to direct your attention to a video. Let's take a look.
I hate the watch and wait period because you go from being active and fighting, and I was a fierce fighter when I was getting chemotherapy, and then you go to this passive watch and wait. I say it's like, you know, this hurricane that they're watching and waiting. You know it's out there, it's coming. So it's a feeling of vulnerability. It's a feeling of passivity and almost powerlessness.
At a young age, I learned how fragile life is. When I was 11 years old, my mom was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. As the oldest child, I quickly became her secondary caregiver, which has forever shaped me. We helped my mom through multiple recurrences for 4 years before losing her to this devastating disease. At the time, treatment options were limited. All we could do was retreat with chemotherapy and watch and wait and hope. It was so hard for us to hear that the doctors thought they had it, but truly didn't. My time with my mom was cut short. But now, women living with recurrent ovarian cancer have options like maintenance therapies, which can extend their time in response and delay recurrence. These options mean power in an otherwise powerless situation. That's why I stand together with care partners and women living with ovarian cancer to declare not on my watch.
Excellent. Now, Dr. Arend, can you discuss the current state of ovarian cancer today and what you see in your practice?
Sure. So ovarian cancer is extremely unique and rare. There's about 22,000 new cases per year in the US, but unfortunately, it's the leading cause of death for all GYN malignancies. And part of what's unique about it, and this is what we've been talking a lot about, is that unlike cervical cancer, which has pap smears, breast cancer, which has mammograms, there's no screening tool. And unlike endometrial cancer, which frequently presents as something like postmenopausal bleeding, the signs and symptoms are extremely vague. Things like bloating, pain, not being able to eat much, feeling full quickly, things that us as women just feel like that's our body changing, that's normal, there's nothing wrong with us. And for that reason, so many women don't come to us until they have widely metastatic disease. And not only is it, already stage 3 or 4 disease, even worse than that, almost 85% or more will eventually recur from their cancer. And it's important for us to have that dialogue with patients from the beginning.
Now, what happens when a woman's cancer recurs? What do you do as a physician to discuss recurrence and subsequently to help patients to make decisions regarding managing that time between the recurrences?
Yeah, so almost always we'll treat patients initially with platinum-based chemotherapy. And the majority will go into remission and stay into remission for at least 6 months. And it used to be that when they recurred, we would treat them again with platinum-based chemotherapy, which we still do, but it used to be that after that, they would go into a watch and wait period and a time of observation. And inevitably, they would recur again. And that time between recurrences continues to get shorter and shorter and shorter. So being able to have, something to offer them that they can potentially take during that time period, not only to prolong the time in which they may recur, but also it's something that makes them feel like they're in control, that they're doing something about their disease. And I think it's important really to bring that up from the beginning. So not only to wait until they recur, but really to make people aware that you will recur. Ovarian cancer is becoming more and more of a chronic disease, and you have options when you recur. And it's not a death sentence. Recurrence is not a death sentence. We have other things that we can give you. And there's a real disconnect between what's available, the new discoveries, what is now FDA approved, and what everyone knows is FDA approved. And some of the recent statistics have shown that as many as 50% of women who could be getting maintenance therapy don't receive it. And while, yes, a lot of those patients may have been a real joint decision-making between them and their physicians, and there's reasons why they choose not to be on therapy, there still seems to be a disconnect in terms of the amount that people know. So really, I think our mission is to educate people, to have a voice so that more people are aware of what is available.
Excellent. Now, Robin, with respect to the work that you do for the ovarian cancer community, how much of a topic is the fear of recurrence and the emotional toll of watching and waiting, and as Dr. Arend described, for women and their loved ones?
Well, so much has changed over time with regards to treatment of ovarian cancer and the way women receive and access support. And the fear of recurrence is very real in every single woman diagnosed with ovarian cancer. It sets ovarian cancer apart from other cancers because this is a never-ending recurring disease. And I think that watch and wait period can actually be more stressful and anxiety-provoking than the initial diagnosis itself. And the statistic that Dr. Erin just mentioned, that half of women are not being eligible for these treatments or not being offered them, and is startling, because if there can be a delay before a recurrence that will allow a woman to reach certain milestones with her family, like getting to see her son graduate high school or her daughter walk down the aisle, that time is invaluable and precious. And that was one of the reasons why I started the Sandy Rollman Ovarian Cancer Foundation, was to give to other women what Sandy ran out of, which was time. Sandy was 32 years old, and she was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer, and she never had a chance. And taking care of her really reshaped my life, because I knew that if ovarian cancer could happen to Sandy, it could happen to anyone. And as I was thinking of starting an organization to help other women and families, I had a lot of self-doubt, because I knew nothing about running an organization, much less starting one. And I remember I went into another patient's room, and she was dying from ovarian cancer. And I told her what I was thinking of doing. And it took all of her strength, but she lifted herself up out of the bed. She grabbed onto my arms and shook me and said, "You go out and you fight for us." And that was a defining moment in my life, because I decided to follow my heart. It was the last time I saw her, but I have lived those words every day since. I go out every day and I fight for these women. And a few years ago, there was another woman. She was just a couple years older than Sandy. We were sitting across the table from one another, and she was nearing the end of her life. And she said 2 things to me that have stuck with me ever since. The first thing she said was that when she was trying to make a treatment decision, she felt like she was trying to put together a jigsaw puzzle. And the second thing she said was, "I wish I would have known." And hearing those words was like a punch in the gut. I always tell a patient, you make the best decision that you can with the information that you have available to you today. That's the best that you can do. That's the best any of us can do. But you have to have that information to make these important decisions.
Yeah, a lot has evolved, but there's a lot more to do in the context of the ovarian cancer community. So thank you for doing what you're doing. Now I'd like to switch gears here and talk about the caregiver perspective. Scott, what was it like to be a caregiver at the time where these types of options weren't available? And what has this experience taught you?
Yeah, you saw a little bit of my story in the PSA we shot for the Not on My Watch movement. I was 11 years old when my mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And we did what you're supposed to do. We treated it fairly aggressively with chemotherapy and radiation. I learned a lot of words at a very young age that most people don't even know about now. I was the oldest of 3 boys, and very quickly learned how to be quiet, how to take care of my mom. She did everything she could, everything that was available at the time. I remember sitting with her on her bed as she tried this visualization exercise of deep breaths, imagining it surrounding the cancer and then exhaling it out. We sat there for hours and did that. She tried different diets, anything she could. And after a couple years, we were told it went into remission, which was, it's another word for the watch and wait period, which we've been talking about today. And I thought that's how things worked. You get sick and then you get better. Unfortunately, the cancer returned even stronger, and it was there was not a whole lot available to us at the time, but more chemotherapy. And my father was listening to talk radio and found a doctor in Philadelphia. We were living in St. Louis at the time, who was experimenting with some high-dose chemotherapy and radiation. So they sent her off to try to save her life. The last 9 months of her life, I wasn't able to see her, and she ultimately passed from this disease. But there are so many advancements that have been made in the 30 years since my mom has passed, and to declare Not on My Watch with this movement and hope to raise awareness about this disease and everything that's happened since is really important to me.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
It's really important for a survivor like me to hear that, because you recognize that it impacts more than the individual who's dealing with the disease.
It absolutely does.
Yes.
There's a whole community that are impacted by it.
Absolutely. Now, how did you get involved with Not on My Watch, and what messages are you trying to get out to the ovarian cancer community, specifically in regards to those who have recurrent?
Yeah, Tesaro and the Not on My Watch movement reached out to me, and I wasn't sure it was something I wanted to be involved in, if I'm being honest with you. You know, it's a painful, a personal, a private story that I haven't talked about in public much. But when I got on the phone with them and actually heard that statistic, that 50% of women who are eligible for these maintenance therapies either don't take them or don't know about them. It kind of blew my mind, and I thought that maybe I'd have a bit of a platform with Not on My Watch to talk about it, to get the word out, to let people know that things have changed in the 30 years, that there have been advancements, that there is hope, and that's really important.
Well, sharing these kind of initiatives like Not on My Watch, it really speaks to the importance of the collaboration so that we can further the awareness of it.
Absolutely.
Now, Dr. Arend, seeing how successful initiatives like Not on My Watch are and have been in the past, can you let us know what else you see being done to support the need for education of maintenance treatment options in the ovarian cancer community specifically?
Yeah, so exactly what you said. I think not only collaboration, but communication. And, you know, from what Scott was saying, 30 years ago, the number of options that we have now is drastically different than what we had then. But what's even more alarming is the number of options that we have in the last 1 year, in the last 6 months. And it's moving, the field is moving so fast right now that it is so important for us to break down these barriers that exist. And part of that is communication between nurses, advocates, survivors, caregivers, clinicians, and to have a platform where we can all sort of talk about the things, talk about from the perspective of the efficacy of the drug to the side effects of the drug, to the emotions the woman is having when she's on or off the drug. All of those conversations have really been in the dark for a lot of years. And it's beautiful to see that those are coming out and we are having those conversations. And not only are we having those conversations in platforms like this, where it's media, but there's a lot more editorials that are being written. There's a lot more publications that are from expert opinions about what's out there. And for me, as a physician scientist and as a clinician, not on my watch, not only not on my watch do I not want patients to know what their options are, but I always say that, throughout this process, one day I want to say, not on my watch is a woman going to die of ovarian cancer. Yep. And that's my passion. And it's to make everybody aware of what's available, and the more we communicate, the further we can get. And we have a long way to go.
We do, yeah.
I agree with Dr. Arend. I also think that the information that we provide to patients needs to be in an easily understandable format so that patients can be their own best advocates and go into their physician's appointment and ask the appropriate questions and know what information they should be receiving. And advocacy organizations play an important role because we work together with similar organizations that have like missions to raise awareness about ovarian cancer. And we also raise funds for research that lead to these new treatments, and we provide support and educational materials to both patients and their families. So we are very much communicating with the patients all the time. And I think that the Not on My Watch movement empowers everyone to be involved, empowers everyone to have a voice against ovarian cancer, whether you're a patient, a physician, a caregiver, a coworker, a friend, everyone can get involved. And for me, both personally and professionally, I never want to hear another woman say, I wish I would have known.
Okay, well, before we wrap up here, do any of you have any other comments that you'd like to?
Yeah, look, we're here on behalf of Tesaro and Not on My Watch to hopefully spark a conversation about recurrent ovarian cancer, but also about the advances that have been made. And I think it's important that we embrace every perspective, whether it's a survivor, a caregiver, a health provider, an advocate. These are all positions that are important, but also all affected by this disease. It's an amazing thing to see the advancements, and I hope that that you guys all out here, if anybody is struggling and suffering with this disease, that you become part of a community, that you educate yourself, that you exhaust every resource to make sure that you don't suffer the way that my mother did. So that's all I hope we get out of this, if anything.
Thank you for
Yeah.
that. Well, thank you all for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to Washington Post Live.
Thank you, guys.
Three days ago, my wife calls me, crying. I pick it up in my hotel room. And she said, I'm calling from the hospital. We had to take my baby daughter, Nuseba, who's named after a warrior princess, to the hospital because she found a bump on the stomach. We got back the results, and there were bumps all around her liver. Today, this morning, we found out that she has stage 4 liver cancer. Deciding to have babies was the best decision we ever made. Our babies have brought us so much joy, and they've brought the world so much joy. And having kids is a risk, but life is a risk.
And all I could think of to say was, but I have a son. I can't end. This world can't end. It has just begun. I didn't feel angry. I felt loved. I believe that in the darkness, even there will be beauty and there will be love. And every now and then, it will feel like more than enough.
Good morning. I'm Libby Casey, on-air reporter and anchor covering politics and accountability here at the Washington Post. And it is my honor to welcome our guest today, Wajahat Ali, contributing opinion writer for the New York Times, also a frequent political commentator on cable news. Hi, Waj. Thanks for being here. And Kate Bowler. She's a divinity professor at Duke University. Her latest book, a memoir called Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved, chronicles her diagnosis of incurable stage 4 colon cancer at the age of 35 and how her sickness has affected her faith. We'd love to have questions from you, the audience, so you can send us those by tweeting them to us using the hashtag #PostLive, and we'll share your questions with Kate and Wajahat. Thanks so much to both of you for opening yourselves up and talking about these things with us. Waj, I want to start with you. As we just saw, your 2-year-old daughter, Nuseba, was diagnosed with stage 4 liver cancer just hours before you were about to give this TED Talk about why we should have kids and the glory of having children.
Timing was immaculate.
Unbelievable. I know this is all very raw for you because this just happened in April, but we'd love to know, how is she doing? How are things going?
So she's doing well. I'm wearing this, so basically when you're in the thick of this, Kate knows, it's a new normal every day. So the reason I'm wearing this bracelet is because, just for sake of efficiency, I want to get back into the hospital. I just left the hospital where she's there getting tests, and I don't want to go through the security again. So she finished her 6th chemo last week. It's a very aggressive form of chemo. She's doing it weekly, and she's a baby. And after every 3 or so, all the levels go down. So now you learn levels and the numbers, where the numbers have to be with the levels, and like the ANC levels and magnesium. So I'm just learning all this. So I just left her at the hospital with her, with my superhero wife and my son, and they're watching Coco. And she demands Popeye's fries and sweet tea. And so after this, I'll go give it to her. But it's all relative, and Kate mentions this in her book. It's your new normal is, well, at least.
Yeah.
So at least the magnesium isn't 1.
Yeah.
It's 2. And so right now she's doing well, relatively. And we did a CT scan yesterday. And for those who are in the thoughts and prayers department, positive energy, send her some positive energy, thoughts and prayers, because that CT scan result, which will come out tonight or probably tomorrow, it's very important to see how she's responding to the chemo. But so far, she's got her, pep back, she's smiling, she's eating,
and she's back to her goofy self. So thank you for asking.
Yeah, thank you. Kate, you were given this diagnosis of stage 4 colon cancer that had already metastasized. This is back in 2015. And you've gone through a lot. You underwent multiple surgeries. You did sort of the classic chemotherapy, and then you were part of experimental immunotherapy treatments.
Yeah.
So how are things going now, 4 years later?
Yeah, well, it's kind of an ongoing, just setting your new horizons. And I keep being surprised that I keep doing well. But it's one of those things where you kind of live scan to scan, and then the last scan was good, and so everyone smiles, and there's a lot of applauding from my parents. And then I make a new goal that makes everyone uncomfortable, like, shouldn't I write a new academic book about the 1400s or something? And then I just plod on. But it's just a totally different way than I used to see my life. Like I just kind of pictured the ladder, I guess. I felt like it was supposed to go up or something. And now I try to keep myself more fully in the present, and then just try to imagine what life could look like in a really rich way now.
You have scans every 3 months? Is that what's your
I'm now on a 6-month schedule, so feeling pretty good, yeah.
And you graduated to that, essentially.
Yeah, it's so funny though, but you begin to be these experts in the language of outcomes. I always think about it like bracelet people.
Yeah.
Like the bracelet people, and then the people who are surrounding them. Like you can see them in the blood work room. There's the person who's looking a little pale, and then there's everyone else who seems to orbit like planets around them. And just knowing that every sickness creates a whole new solar system in everyone's lives, and you learn all the language and you learn to readjust.
And the measure of success also changes, or like the measure of happiness, because now it's like, oh, the level came out good. Today is a good day.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Like, oh, she left the hospital.
Yeah.
This is a victory.
Yeah.
Oh, she ate food today without vomiting. Yes. And you think about it, like 2 months ago, that would not have been a normal measure of success or happiness, but it just reorients everything. Because cancer is a son of a bitch that just takes a toll on the baby, on the family, on everything. And so you kind of have to respect, it's like the movie Alien, like the xenomorph. You have to respect the purity of its savagery, right? Like it's such a savage beast. That in the face of it, when you see people who are surviving, enduring it, and when it's especially affecting your baby, you have to admire the resilience and the victories, which to you might be like, that's a strange victory that her magnesium is at 2. And I'm like, listen, buddy, God forbid if you were enduring this, trust me, a 2 mag level right now is the win of the week.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you more about sort of how your perspective shifts, but first I want to hear about how your wife's doing, Waj, because she's a doctor.
Yes.
She's amazing. But she's looking at this from both the clinical expertise of understanding this a little more than you might have going into this, but also as a mom.
So it's difficult. My wife's a superhero. I'm not just saying that. She's like super badass. Am I allowed to say that? I just did.
You're
sorry,
allowed
Wash Po Life.
You're allowed to say
But look, my wife is stuck to Nuseba right now because Nuseba wants mommy. So my wife's been literally with her for the entire week. I just left my wife. She goes, my back's hurting. She doesn't complain. She goes, my back's hurting because I've been in the bed. Each time we want to give her a break, Nuseba, super sharp, spidey sense, is like, what do you mean, Mom, you're leaving? And Mom's like, well, I'm not going anywhere. So the mom in particular in this relationship takes the burden, literally physically. She hasn't gone to work, like, at all. It disrupts everything, right? And so I was telling you this in the green room, just certain personalities, my wife is emotionally very grounded and strong, and she just takes it day by day. She has her moments where she needs the good cry, and she said yesterday, her and Nuseba both they just had to cry. And I'm the robot, I don't cry. So that's like, that's my wife and her, they said we need to let it out. But other than that, I'm very lucky, and Nuseba's very lucky to have a mom like Sarah, because in addition to just being a strong person who's able to just withstand this trauma, honestly, she's a doctor. And so having a doctor who actually understands this in your family is in itself a blessing that most people don't have, because then she's able to let me know we're on the right track.
How are you talking to Nuseba about this? What's her comprehension of what's
super sharp? She understands everything. So this is Nuseba. She's about to turn 3 next month. She literally said, like last month, she goes, cancer. Wasn't cancer that thing that one auntie got in our community and she passed away? And so she knows exactly what she has. She knows exactly what's happening. She understands everything. And my son, Ibrahim, was going to turn 5. He's just like at the playground. He goes, yeah, my sister Nuseba, she's sick. She's got cancer in the stomach. Her stomach hurts, but she'll be back home soon. So kids are far more sensitive, intelligent, and aware than we give them credit for. And so the type of energy and language we use around children, especially children who are enduring this, I think is very important. She picks up everything.
Do you feel like the medical professionals who are dealing with your family are aware of that? Are they being sensitive?
Very aware. We're very lucky. I mean, for sake of privacy, I won't give the hospital, but being in this area, we're very lucky to have some of the best hospitals. And just the nurses. And just one thing I'll say, just to show how important it is to have, you know, nonprofits and you know, organizations that help. My daughter has art therapy. She has a lady who comes in and sings Moana songs. She has nurses who come by once a week and give candy. These are the small things that we take for granted that you have, that, you know, when people give their money to, they're like, what am I supporting? You're supporting endeavors and programs like this that really put a smile on a kid's face and make such an unpleasant situation bearable. And even having that staff there that cares makes everything better.
You know, we're all the parents of young children, and you want to protect your kids from all of it. So, Kate, how have you talked to your young son about your illness?
Well, when I got sick, he was so little that it was mostly about, it's weird, like when you become a parent, your body is suddenly a home for somebody. It's the thing that makes people feel safe. And I had a lot of stuff on me that was suddenly a little bit terrifying. I had a port, I'd had any number of surgeries, I had to wear a chemotherapy bag that was just hardcore fanny packs, a lot of bags on bags on bags when you're sick. And it meant that I had to try to find ways to relate to him again when my body was not friendly anymore. So
and kids just want to crawl all over you. I think especially sometimes they sense when it's not time to crawl all over you and they want to crawl all over you.
I think that was the most, not touching him was exhausting. I did a lot of like just puppetry, where I would sort of bring out something friendly and be like, let's fight with these puppets at an arm's length. So a lot of just little tricks. But mostly it was about trying to find a way that I could reground myself just as his mom and not just as a cancer patient. I mean, I think that's just the threat with anything that's so terrifying, is you're just suddenly eclipsed by something you didn't choose. Like your whole identity is this awful thing that you didn't know anything about a couple weeks before.
We're looking at a picture of you from Instagram with a lot of joy in your family.
Are just a huge part of our lifestyle. Huge ukulele family.
That's a great LinkedIn profile. Dino Ninja guitar strumming sidekick.
You know, I'm super protective though about my home as a place of like real calm and peace though, in part because and hilariously, that's why I wrote a book and I didn't, that was the stuff I didn't feel like I could say. It was all the rage I had, all the frustration, all the, you know, it was so disorienting for me to go from being an expert in something to suddenly finding myself the unwanted recipient of it. So it was, I felt like writing everything down and keeping it in one place was also my attempt to keep my home to be like a really beautiful place where I could relax into the love of people who knew who I was.
May I make a quick observation about just parenthood, because you brought up, in just reading Kate's book, and since we're all parents, I think how it affects you as a parent, right? Because it affected her, and reading her book, which everyone should buy, by the way, came out in paperback. I don't get a cut. So I'm actually sincere in my praise for it. Your first comment was, how will, you know, I'm a mother. How will this affect my kid? And my first reaction as a parent, and I don't know if other parents have gone through this, is you make a bargain with the universe or with God. And so my first immediate reaction was, all right, God, let's do this. My life for my kid's life. Easy trade. I'll absorb it. And the world does not work that way, unfortunately. And so you can't absorb your child's pain and suffering. So you just have to be there in your inadequacy, in all your inadequacies and weakness as a parent, and just try to help them. And so we're in the thick of it. So that's why I feel like, what can I do aside from giving my life? I can't give my life. So what trade can I make? What bargain can I make? What negotiation can I make with God or fate in the universe? And you don't get an answer back. And then you see your kid and you're like, okay, we just fight. We fight with her and do the best we can.
Kate, you were talking about some of the hard stuff that you didn't want to import into your home, some of the rage, some of the really tough aspects of this. It was months before you were diagnosed. Like, you lost some precious months before doctors pinpointed what was going on with you. And then when you were finally told stage 4 cancer, it was an intern, and you describe him as being like the shortest coat, right? That people who have sort of earned their medical chops get like longer coats, but this is like this virtual kid coming in.
Yeah, this 12-year-old just wanders in, looking lightly disoriented, reads my chart. And all I remember saying was, you better be holding my hand if you're gonna tell me stuff like that. You do feel like, and it's taken me a while to realize the deep burdens of doctors. Me loving doctors has been a journey. I love them now. But I thought, I was like, I'm a professor. I'm a fancy person. I work over there. I kept pointing where my office was. Like, why doesn't anyone give me, there's also just no dignity in the sort of endless blue cotton that you are given to live the rest of your life. And I felt so stripped of all the things I knew how to do. I mean, just trying to be an avid learner, you want to learn all the vocabulary, you want to be the best possible cancer patient. But that was also just the really intense mindset I had, that I took all of the hopes I had for living in the meritocracy and I just applied it to being the cancer patient, where I wanted to win at being a cancer patient. And it turns out that medical systems are incredibly complex and often cruel. And that most of the hopes I had for getting access were not easy because I'm not American. And almost immediately, we realized that treatment was going to bankrupt my family. So attempts to sort of both find care and then find ways to pay for it was the darkest moments of my life.
And your dad was offering to basically sell all the assets that he had, that he and his
on the Canadian dollar, no less. So, yeah, everyone. I mean, that's what it does, though, right? The cruelty of it and the totalizing force that cancer is. Everyone just starts emptying their pockets. They're like, is this enough? Is this going to bridge the gap between what you need and where you are? And so much of it is just this obstacle course of trying to figure out where the trial is, who knows the most, like what are the back doors and side doors to get to that information. It's taken me years to get decent information about my illness. And that's because I'm absurdly privileged to be able to know how to navigate just this intense web.
And you talk about going home and like researching stuff, right? Like getting out the dictionary and trying to figure out what this coded language means.
I didn't know what all the tumor language was totally. They said, you have Mets. I was like, oh, sounds fine, right? It's a team. I was just constantly Googling and then being horrified. It's a whole new language and it's a whole different world, especially when you just never thought that you'd have to navigate it.
And the probabilities, you start looking at the probabilities.
Oh my gosh, no thank
like,
you.
Ooh, probably 40 to 60.
Oh God, yeah.
40 to 50. And then you see their stages, like stages.
Yeah.
Like, is this the good stage of cancer?
Yeah.
You just I just want to say that again. The good stage of cancer, right? It goes back to that at least question. At least it's not stage 3.
I Googled, is there a stage 5? Like, where am I at on this?
Sorry for the dark humor sometimes you needed. But, it also affects, I just want to mention that how cancer, the totality of it, how it affects not just the person suffering, the parents, but I just mentioned my father and my father-in-law, right? These are old Spartan South Asian immigrant men, all right? They never weep or cry, right? They're like old school. And when I told them, my father-in-law just wept for 2 days. Like he couldn't talk without weeping. And my father I never heard my father cry in my life. Yeah. And he's just like, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, why are you saying sorry? He goes, I'm sorry that it's just so much for me.
Yeah.
And he goes, at this stage in our life, we've taken a lot. We're grateful, but to see this happen to Nuseba, our granddaughter, he said it's too much for me. And so I want to just mention the grandparents who also endure this. It's anyone who's in that if you will, the electron shell circling around the person, the orbit, it impacts them. And it has, it's just brutal.
I mean, you've talked about that on your podcast, Kate, that you realized that loving you was causing people pain, and that your friends were all going into therapy because they were so shaken by their young, vibrant 35-year-old friend, professor, mom, coping with this.
Yeah, that was kind of a weird shift. And that's still not something I'm totally used to, is suddenly you're the worst thing that's happened to people. And it's hard not to see it that way. You're like, loving me will kind of maybe destroy you, is when you look at your sad, beautiful parents, and they just launched you, right? Like you had the kid, you finally are living your life, and then you feel like you're just taking it all apart. So It's just a funny thing though. Like the second you're diagnosed, you suddenly do feel like you're, to strangers, you're a problem to be solved. You're like a riddle. Like, why did this happen?
Sorry, I have
No. It's great. I actually wore very absorbent cotton, so. Yeah, I mean, strangers are trying to figure out why it happened to you, not them. Like, was it something you ate? Was it in your family? There's
It's
just
like they want the reassurance that I'm safe from this.
You're over
Like,
here.
Yeah.
And
Not that it's your fault, but like, what is the secret code? What did you do that I can avoid doing?
But
I'm not going to
it
get
could be
it.
my fault. I was being wheeled into a procedure a couple weeks ago, and the nurse on the way in, and mostly nurses are spectacular, but the nurse on the way in was like, "Oh, colon cancer. Man, it must be stuff you guys are eating nowadays." And I was like, "This is not helpful." So,
Did you say something to her? Did you just let it? Did you just let it go?
I was like, it was pre the mask on the face. I was like, "This is not yeah, exactly.
Anesthesia hasn't kicked in yet.
I know, you're like struggling against the anesthesia. But it's pretty common for me to get the commentary, and that's mostly just what I want for people like us, is just for everyone to realize everyone's life is so much more fragile than we expect.
Right.
And just to have a little more charity and less of a deep desire to explain it out of an intense anxiety that, I mean, every person suffering creates this problem, right? But not this person. And I get it, but like, don't make the suffering people resolve that for you.
I found out that we've had to become people's therapists. It's very interesting.
Yes.
Like I have to calm people down once they hear about my daughter's diagnosis.
Yes.
And I'm sitting there thinking like, I should have gone into therapy. I'm really good at this. And then I think about it, I'm like, wait a minute, I'm the father.
Yes.
What's happening?
We should all be
and
calm
other
too
people
now.
are crying, like, you don't know how I'm dealing with this right now. It's really affecting me. Yes. And which is fine because there's empathy and I understand.
It's coming from a place of love.
It's coming from a place of love, but imagine doing it, and this we're in the thick of it, right? Like you said, the fog of war, 2 months in. But that's why people, I think, family members or those who are suffering from cancer, I think the reason why sometimes they avoid public places is, I was just at an event on Sunday, and once you walk in, everyone gives you the look, oh, the dad.
Yeah.
And then you just get the look. The look is like this. And you could see the looks, and then I feel like I could just press play on the same talking points, but you have to repeat the same talking points. How is she? How are you? And you're like, I understand the empathy, and then you have to just sit there and go through the motions, and after 20 minutes, I was so exhausted.
Yeah.
And my son was exhausted, and he's like, let's go home, Baba. I'm like, yeah, let's go home and have pizza. And you can't knock people, because what else are they supposed to say, right? But like you said, it becomes draining.
Yeah.
And
Well, let's talk about some things that people can say.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
because
She knows
Kate's book, Everything Happens for a Reason, and
Yes,
Other Lives
definitely
I've
say
Loved.
that. Lead with that.
Like lead with that. And then you talk about how people, God needed an angel.
Sure. Yeah.
So what are things that we can avoid saying, and then more importantly, what are things that actually help? Like, what have you
Sure.
found that's been helpful?
Well, because most of it comes out of these just very thick cultural scripts we have around positivity. And I think it's infected all of us, where we feel like we have to have both explanations and then reassurances. Either a kind of religious determinism, where there has to be a plan, God isn't giving you anything you can't handle, which is they're running the math, right? Like everything that's happening to you, there's an equal sign, and I'm going to tell you about what happens at the other side. And it'll even out, I swear. And that's such a tough, none of that language is helpful, because it assumes that they know what's going to happen, which I would love to meet more fortune tellers and seers, just prophets of all kinds. But they can't promise me anything, and I don't need them to promise me anything. So all of the have you tried this, or when my aunt died, everyone's aunts are always doing very poorly when I talk to them. And so all those desires to relate are so lovely and tempting, but they always end up giving you information that's either a burden or a weapon used to explain why it's me. So the things I just love are, I don't know, when people take a part of who you were and let you feel like you're still that person again. Maybe you still hope to be funny someday, or just kind of test the waters. I love it when people just say, I heard what happened, I want you to know, and then just something lovely like, I'm praying for you, I'm thinking of you. And then just a little pause, and then let the person take it where they want to go. Because so easily I became devoted to talking about reality show programming just to have my, you wouldn't believe what's happening on The Bachelorette this season. But just give us the off-ramp, just so that we can be more than one thing again.
What's been helping you get through this time in terms of, well, we can talk about sort of the bigger picture of this, but just in terms of the little gestures, what family's been able to do, some of the mechanics of what's helpful for you right now.
I mean, we're talking about this right in DC. I'm originally from the Bay Area. My wife's from Florida. So in DC, we're like, we don't have the village. And we have 2 kids, right? So just having a parent come, and my mom just coincidentally happened to be visiting when this diagnosis happened, that was a huge relief. We have an ecosystem of friends who are just very lovely and sweet, and I just want to appreciate everyone's kindness. There's something about when your baby gets cancer, it brings out people's inherent decency and kindness to the point where I got this Twitter message as I was saying, some guy said, I hate you on TV, I hate all your opinions, I hate you on Twitter, but I just want to let you know my mom is praying for you. And I'm like, thank you, sir, I think. And so, you know, just kindness. I think this is common decency and kindness. Someone coming up to you with that short statement, I heard what happened, I'm thinking of you, anything I can do, let me know, pause. And then also there's just something about that normalcy factor 2 months in, which is really nice. Like people want me to be me again and talk about other things, or the Warriors losing, congratulations to Canada, pain. But just, you know, or here, practical stuff, ready? Grubhub cards.
Yeah, that's right.
Or a DoorDash. We appreciate the toys. I have so many toys right now. I gotta donate these toys. But someone coming in saying, oh, you have a kid, Ibrahim? I have kids. Maybe he'd like to just hang out with our kids. Just small gestures like that to bring back a level of normalcy. And that's what we've seen has really helped our family. Because again, cancer just doesn't impact Nuseba. I have a 5-year-old boy. And Sarah, and you know, just, oh yeah, I have to work. Life and pay the bills. But just, I think it gives a person an opportunity to exercise kindness and decency without the script and the tropes. And it's an interesting opportunity, if you want to take it, to test yourself if you can be that person.
I think sometimes those of us who are in that orbit don't know what to do. And there's a danger in doing nothing and staying silent because you don't want to say the wrong thing, you don't want to do the wrong thing. But Kate, I remember hearing you talk about how some friends of yours just sort of persistently, I think, kept sending you a gift card to like Whole Foods or something, like every, no endorsement, every month, you know, for many, many, many months. I believe that was you or one of your guests talked about that on your podcast, where it just didn't go away. Like they just kept checking in and sort of sending you that, which...
Yeah, and that's sort of the evolution of like from crisis to chronic, is like a lot of people are really good in the crisis moment, but when you still have the same depressing problem a year from then, you sort of feel like the giant bummer that comes to parties and ruins small talk for everybody. So it is really nice when people find ways to create these sustaining little moments that recognize that you're still going through it. So because I have scans so often, it's just nice when someone remembers, like, oh, is it coming up? And then like gets me a Starbucks order, or a lot of what I struggled with, honestly, because I was trying to get care, was they just said, hey, is there any information you needed? And I created a little Google Doc called No Kate Left Behind, where people could add health information that I needed. And it was those kinds of little efforts that have meant that I went from feeling like I was totally alone, like I'm, you know, foreign, so I don't have any family in this country. I just needed all the people to surround me and then to lift me up, so I didn't feel lonely anymore.
It's a community. I think it was the actor Scott said it, the pretty people. So it's the politicians and the pretty people, and then the Morlocks, the writers, come in at the end. But he said, some of my best friends are Morlocks. He said, a community, you create a community, right? And I think that's what we've noticed, that there's a community of survivors, there's a community of people who've gone through it, there's a community of people who are going through it right now, and they give you best practices. And that's something that I've been worried about, is like, we don't know how long this is going to last for Nuseba, right? Like everyone says, oh, 3 months, 6, well, we don't know. And so I was thinking about that, like what happens if we become like the cancer parents? Like the Debbie Downers who come in and everyone has to then give the script and then say, oh, how is she? Anyway, and so I think those cards, or just the thought, you know, and there's no science to this, right? Because I don't knock anyone. You know, the stuff that annoys us is not too annoying, because anyone who makes the effort at the end of the day, I am willing to invest in their good intention. But we're,
Well, I'm not
Yeah.
for some people. Like, I've had
been
some
this
winners,
longer.
though. I've
Yeah.
had some winners. Like, I've heard that since Kate got cancer, she's never been happier. I'm like, well, I feel like I've had some moments. So, yeah, I think that maybe for suffering people, though, there's the desire to say that they've distilled intense wisdom, and therefore that it's the reward is always commensurate with the suffering. That I profoundly resent.
It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
That you
Sure.
need to be the bearers of our newfound cultural wisdom for.
Anything, though, to break the intense script around relentless positivity,
Yeah.
I think will just free up a little more space for everyone to be human.
We have a great question coming in from Twitter. Rob asks, when you're both going through these things, where do you find your strength? And then where do you feel discouraged? So.
Well, I guess, not just because I'm a divinity school professor that teaches adorable mainline pastors, but I have found just the experience of feeling loved by God to be really grounding for me. I guess because cancer makes you feel like paper, right? You come in, you're just all blood work and results, and your body isn't yours anymore, and you wonder when you're ever going to have decorative hair again. And it's hard to feel reconstituted, and the experience of feeling loved has been really powerful for me. The parts where I feel discouraged is when I don't know when it's going to end. The chronic nature of it means I don't know how to talk about the future like other people can talk about the future, where people just make really casual plans, and I miss doing that.
So in addition to talking about this unfortunate disease, my mission here is to convert everyone to Islam. And so to answer your question, I'm just kidding, but that was a joke. Everyone's like, oh my, we knew it. They were right. Everyone uses a crutch, and I think people say, oh, faith is a crutch, but you need crutches in life, right? So if people want to be derisive towards religion and say it's a crutch, then so be it. I think having that faith has helped me and my wife. The feeling of being loved, the fact that I got very lucky, married way up, and have an amazing wife. You've met her before, you know this is true, Libby knows. And just being very lucky, we're very lucky that I think about that every day. Like, we have health care. Like, I have parents who love us. We have friends who love us. We have some money. We're very lucky compared to most people. I think in a strange way, being grateful every day has given me a perspective that allows us to move forward, both my wife and I. And that gives me a strength. What gives me a lack of strength very quickly, the time went to zero, now they're going to wheel me off.
We're okay.
Is not knowing, right? How can I solve this problem? I'm the father.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to solve things. How come I can't protect my daughter? What do you mean? Like, how can I fix this? I can fix most things, and I can't fix it.
Yeah.
When will this end? I don't know. Everything was going well last Wednesday, and she's back in the hospital Friday. WTF? When will she get home? I don't know. And I was telling Kate this, I was telling you, I'm very good in chaos. That's one of my very few superpowers in life, my only superpower. But late at night every day I can't sleep because I run the scenarios in my head, and it keeps me up every night. And I try to fix this problem.
Totally.
Even though I know you can't,
Yeah.
but that's what's discouraging. Is like, I can't fix this.
Yeah.
Do you feel like this has deepened your faith? Has it challenged your faith? Is faith just there with you for the journey?
It hasn't, I think for me personally, the trap, the quicksand, is if you really start asking, why me? Or why did God do this to us? That is a dangerous place to be in. And my wife and I have not ventured into that space. It goes back to the previous point where my wife and I think just based on our perspective in life, we go, this happens. It's a 1 in a 1.5 million freak occurrence. It's rare. It happens to kids 0 to 3. I don't have cancer in my family. My wife doesn't have cancer in her family. Why is this happening? We have no idea. But my wife and I both said, it happened. Deal with it. Things happen to people. I could have easily looked at that and said, why us? Why me? I was a good Muslim. I don't drink. I don't eat pork. I eat halal. Damn you, Lord. But what will it accomplish? It'll accomplish nothing. So for me, it actually has helped in profound ways just when it comes to perspective, and has helped my wife. And, I hope to think that this is going to be a small chapter in an otherwise very rich, long narrative for Nusseibeh.
Yeah, that's right.
I can only hope.
Yeah.
How about you? That question was, I think, for both of us.
I love that. I loved your answer. That's beautiful.
And Kate, let's close by, since your profession is exploring faith, writing about faith,
Yeah.
Looking at faith with an eye of both living it, but also watching it with almost like an anthropological
Yes,
gaze.
yes. I'm always the person with the clipboard at a megachurch. Yes. Yes, that is my life.
So, can you just talk briefly about, you said that you felt surrounded by love and that your faith is there with you. But have there been moments of challenge, and how have you gotten through those in terms of just sort of your belief in your faith?
Yeah, I mean, maybe the harder part was like, because I'm an expert in the prosperity gospel, I did get a lot of feedback from other people with that faith perspective that felt that it must have been something that I had done or said. Or
the idea of the prosperity gospel is you will be rewarded on this earth for the good that you do, for living the good life. Not just in heaven, but you would get nice cars, you'd be healthy, the good things come now.
Yes, and I had spent 10 years studying that, and so I knew a lot of people in that faith community, and I wrote a big book about it. And then when it happened to me, I think, even though the book was very gentle, I think there was some speculation that it was likely something that I had said or done. So that was hard for me to feel like Christians can be the most pointed in their indictments. So I've tried to just open up a generosity and just that in that space where we don't know, that if we step in with love, that it can do a lot more than, these sort of endless explanations for one another's pain. Yeah.